a lot of people have been very critical of the recently released Google's Gemini 1.5 for essentially, in my words, I could say super woke in the negative connotation of that word. There is some almost hilariously absurd things that it does, like it modifies history, like generating images of a Black George Washington, or perhaps more seriously, something that you commented on Twitter, which is refusing to comment on or generate images of, or even descriptions of Tiananmen Square or the Tank Man, one of the most sort of legendary protest images in history. And of course, these images are highly censored by the Chinese government, and therefore everybody started asking questions of what is the process of designing these LLMs. What is the role of censorship in these, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you commented on Twitter saying that open source is the answer.
Yeah.
Essentially. So can you explain?
I actually made that comment on just about every social network I can, and I've made that point multiple times in various forums. Here's my point of view on this. People can complain that AI systems are biased, and they generally are biased by the distribution of the training data that they've been trained on. That reflects biases in society. And that is potentially offensive to some people, or potentially not. And some techniques to debias then become offensive to some people, because of historical incorrectness and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so you can ask the question. You can ask two questions. The first question is it possible to produce an AI system that is not biased? And the answer is absolutely not. And it's not because of technological challenges, although there are technological challenges to that. It's because bias is in the eye of the beholder. Different people may have different ideas about what constitutes bias. For a lot of things. I mean, there are facts that are indisputable, but there are a lot of opinions or things that can be expressed in different ways. And so you cannot have an unbiased system. That's just an impossibility. And so what's the answer to this? And the answer is the same answer that we've found in liberal democracy about the press. The press needs to be free and diverse. We have free speech for a good reason. Is because we don't want all of our information to be to come from a unique source, because that's opposite to the whole idea of democracy and progress of ideas and even science. Right? In science, people have to argue for different opinions, and science makes progress when people disagree and they come up with an answer, and a consensus forms. Right? And it's true in all democracies around the world. So there is a future which is already happening, where every single one of our interaction with the digital world will be mediated by AI systems, AI assistants, right? We're going to have smart glasses. You can already buy them from Meta, the Ray-Ban Meta, where you can talk to them and they are connected with an LLM, and you can get answers on any question you have. Or you can be looking at a monument and there is a camera in the system that in the glasses you can ask it, like, what can you tell me about this building or this monument? You can be looking at a menu in a foreign language and the thing will translate it for you, or we can do real-time translation if we speak different languages. So a lot of our interactions with the digital world are going to be mediated by those systems in the near future. Increasingly the search engines that we're going to use are not going to be search engines. They're going to be dialogue systems that will just ask a question and it will answer and then point you to perhaps an appropriate reference for it. But here is the thing. We cannot afford those systems to come from a handful of companies on the west coast of the US, because those systems will constitute the repository of all human knowledge. And we cannot have that be controlled by a small number of people, right? It has to be diverse. For the same reason, the press has to be diverse. So how do we get a diverse set of AI assistants? It's very expensive and difficult to train a base model, right? A base LLM at the moment. In the future it might be something different, but at the moment that's an LLM. So only a few companies can do this properly. And if some of those top systems are open source, anybody can use them, anybody can fine-tune them. If we put in place some systems that allows any group of people, whether they are individual citizens, groups of citizens, government organizations, NGOs, companies, whatever, to take those open source systems, AI systems, and fine-tune them for their own purpose on their own data, then we're going to have a very large diversity of different AI systems that are specialized for all of those things, right? So I tell you, I talked to the French government quite a bit, and the French government will not accept that the digital diet of all their citizens be controlled by 3 companies on the west coast of the US. That's just not acceptable. It's a danger to democracy, regardless of how well-intentioned those companies are, right? And it's also a danger to local culture, to values, to language, right? I was talking with the founder of Infosys in India. He's funding a project to fine-tune Llama 2, the open source model produced by Meta, so that Llama 2 speaks all 22 official languages in India. It's very important for people in India. I was talking to a former colleague of mine, Mustafa Sisse, who used to be a scientist at FAIR, and then moved back to Africa, created a research lab for Google in Africa, and now has a new startup called Kera. And what he's trying to do is basically have LLM that speak the local languages in Senegal so that people can have access to medical information, because they don't have access to doctors. It's a very small number of doctors per capita in Senegal. You can't have any of this unless you have open source platforms. So with open source platforms, you can have AI systems that are not only diverse in terms of political opinions or things of that type, but in terms of language, culture, value systems, political opinions, technical abilities in various domains. And you can have an industry, an ecosystem of companies that fine-tune those open source systems for vertical applications in industry, right? You have, I don't know, a publisher has thousands of books, and they want to build a system that allows a customer to just ask a question about the content of any of their books. You need to train on their proprietary data, right? You have a company, we have one within Meta, it's called MetaMate, and it's basically an LLM that can answer any question about internal stuff about the company. Very useful. A lot of companies want this, right? A lot of companies want this not just for their employees, but also for their customers, to take care of their customers. So the only way you're going to have an AI industry, the only way you're going to have AI systems that are not uniquely biased, is if you have open source platforms on top of which any group can build specialized systems. So the direction of inevitable direction of history is that the vast majority of AI systems will be built on top of open source platforms.
So that's a beautiful vision. So meaning like a company like Meta or Google or so on should take only minimal fine-tuning steps after the building the foundation pre-trained model. As few steps as possible.
Basically.
Can Meta afford to do that?
No.
So I don't know if you know this, but companies are supposed to make money somehow, and open source is like giving away. I don't know. Mark made a video. Mark Zuckerberg, very sexy video, talking about 350,000 NVIDIA H100s.
Yeah.
The math of that is just for the GPUs, that's 100 billion, plus the infrastructure for training everything. So I'm no business guy, but how do you make money on that? So the vision you paint is a really powerful one, but how is it possible to make money?
Okay, so you have several business models, right?
Mm-hmm.
The business model that Meta is built around is you offer a service, and the financing of that service is either through ads or through business customers. So, for example, if you have an LLM that can help a mom and pop pizza place by talking to the customers through WhatsApp, and so the customers can just order a pizza, and the system will just ask them like, what topping do you want, or what size, blah blah blah. The business will pay for that. Okay, that's a model. And otherwise, if it's a system that is on the more kind of classical services, it can be ad supported, or there's several models. But the point is, if you have a big enough potential customer base, and you need to build that system anyway for them, it doesn't hurt you to actually distribute it in open source.
Again, I'm no business guy, but if you release the open source model, then other people can do the same kind of task and compete on it. Basically, provide fine-tuned models for businesses.
Sure.
So is the bet that Meta is making. By the way, I'm a huge fan of all this, but is the bet that Meta is making is like, we'll do a better job of it?
Well, no. The bet is more, we already have a huge user base and customer base.
Right.
Right. So it's going to be useful to them. Whatever we offer them is going to be useful, and there is a way to derive revenue from this.
Sure.
And it doesn't hurt that we provide that system, or the base model, right, the foundation model, in open source for others to build applications on top of it too. If those applications turn out to be useful for our customers, we can just buy it from them.
Mm-hmm.
It could be that they will improve the platform. In fact, we see this already. There is literally millions of downloads of Llama 2, and thousands of people who have provided ideas about how to make it better. This clearly accelerates progress to make the system available to sort of a wide community of people. And there's literally thousands of businesses who are building applications with it. So Meta's ability to derive revenue from this technology is not impaired by the distribution of base models in open source.
The fundamental criticism that Gemini is getting is that, as you point out on the West Coast, just to clarify, we're currently on the East Coast, where I would suppose Meta AI headquarters would be. So there are strong words about the West Coast, but I guess the issue that happens is, I think it's fair to say that most tech people have a political affiliation with the left wing. They lean left. And so the problem that people are criticizing Gemini with is that there's, in that debiasing process that you mentioned, that their ideological lean becomes obvious. Is this something that could be escaped? You're saying open source is the only way. Have you witnessed this kind of ideological lean that makes engineering difficult?
No, I don't think it has to do. I don't think the issue has to do with the political leaning of the people designing those systems. It has to do with the acceptability or political leanings of their customer base or audience, right? So a big company cannot afford to offend too many people. So they're going to make sure that whatever product they put out is safe, whatever that means. And it's very possible to overdo it. And it's also it's impossible to do it properly for everyone. You're not going to satisfy everyone So that's what I said before. You cannot have a system that is unbiased, that is perceived as unbiased by everyone. It's going to be, you push it in one way, one set of people are going to see it as biased, and then you push it the other way, and another set of people is going to see it as biased. And then in addition to this, there's the issue of, if you push the system perhaps a little too far in one direction, it's going to be non-factual, right? You're going to have, black Nazi soldiers in.
So we should mention image generation of black Nazi soldiers, which is not factually accurate.
Right,
Yeah.
and can be offensive for some people as well, right? So, it's going to be impossible to kind of produce systems that are unbiased for everyone. So the only solution that I see is diversity.
And diversity in the full meaning of that word, diversity of in every possible way.
Yeah.
Mark Andreessen just tweeted today. Let me do a TLDR. The conclusion is only startups and open source can avoid the issue that he's highlighting with big tech. He's asking, can big tech actually field generative AI products? 1. Ever-escalating demands from internal activists, employee mobs, crazed executives, broken boards, pressure groups, extremist regulators, government agencies, the press, in quotes, experts, and everything corrupting the output. 2. Constant risk of generating a bad answer or drawing a bad picture or rendering a bad video. Who knows what is going to say or do at any moment. 3. Legal exposure, product liability, slander, election law, many other things, and so on. Anything that makes Congress mad. 4. Continuous attempts to tighten grip on acceptable output degrade the model, like how good it actually is, in terms of usable and pleasant to use and effective and all that kind of stuff. And 5, publicity of bad text, images, video, actual puts those examples into the training data for the next version, so on. So he just highlights how difficult this is from all kinds of people being unhappy. As you said, you can't create a system that makes everybody happy.
Yes.
So if you're going to do the fine-tuning yourself and keep a closed source, essentially the problem there is then trying to minimize the number of people who are going to be unhappy.
Yep.
And you're saying like the only that almost impossible to do right, and it's the better way is to do open source.
Basically, yeah. I mean, Mark is right about a number of things that he lists that indeed scare large companies. Certainly congressional investigations is one of them. Legal liability. Making things that get people to hurt themselves or hurt others. Like big companies are really careful about not producing things of this type, and because they have they don't want to hurt anyone, first of all, and then second, they want to preserve their business. So it's essentially impossible for systems like this that can inevitably formulate political opinions and opinions about various things that may be political or not, but that people may disagree about moral issues and things about like questions about religion and things like that, right? Or cultural issues that people from different communities would disagree with in the first place. So there's only kind of a relatively small number of things that people will sort of agree on, basic principles. But beyond that, if you want those systems to be useful, they will necessarily have to offend a number of people, inevitably.
And so open source is just better. And then
diversity is better, right?
And open source enables diversity.
That's right. Open source enables diversity.
That's going to be a fascinating world where, if it's true that the open source world, if Meta leads the way and creates this kind of open source foundation model world, there's going to be like governments will have a fine-tuned model, and then potentially, people that vote left and right will have their own model and preference to be able to choose, and it will potentially divide us even more. But that's on us humans. We get to figure out. Basically, the technology enables humans to human more effectively, and all the difficult ethical questions that humans raise will just leave it up to us to figure it out.
I mean, there are some limits to what, the same way there are limits to free speech, there has to be some limit to the kind of stuff that those systems might be authorized to produce. Some guardrails. So, I mean, that's one thing I've been interested in, which is in the type of architecture that we were discussing before, where the output of a system is the result of an inference to satisfy an objective. That objective can include guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
And we can put guardrails in open source systems. I mean, if we eventually have systems that are built with this blueprint, we can put guardrails in those systems that guarantee that there is sort of a minimum set of guardrails that make the system non-dangerous and non-toxic, etc. Basic things that everybody would agree on. And then, the fine-tuning that people will add, or the additional guardrails that people will add, will kind of cater to their community, whatever it is.
And the fine-tuning will be more about the gray areas of what is hate speech, what is dangerous, and all that kind of stuff. I mean,
or different value systems.
Still value systems. I mean, but still, even with the objectives of how to build a bioweapon, for example, I think something you've commented on, or at least there's a paper where a collection of researchers is trying to understand the social impacts of these LLMs. Mm-hmm. And I guess one threshold is nice is like, does the LLM make it any easier than a search would, like a Google search would?
Right. So the increasing number of studies on this seems to point to the fact that it doesn't help. So having an LLM doesn't help you design or build a bioweapon or a chemical weapon if you already have access to a search engine and a library. And so the sort of increased information you get, or the ease with which you get it, doesn't really help you. That's the first thing. The second thing is, it's one thing to have a list of instructions of how to make a chemical weapon, for example, or a bioweapon. It's another thing to actually build it. And it's much harder than you might think, and an LLM will not help you with that. In fact, nobody in the world, not even countries, use bioweapons because most of the time they have no idea how to protect their own populations against it. So it's too dangerous actually to kind of ever use. And it's in fact banned by international treaties. Chemical weapons is different. It's also banned by treaties, but it's the same problem. It's difficult to use in situations that doesn't turn against the perpetrators. But we could ask Elon Musk, I can give you a very precise list of instructions of how you build a rocket engine. Mm-hmm. And even if you have a team of 50 engineers that are really experienced building it, you're still going to have to blow up a dozen of them before you get one that works. Mm-hmm. And, it's the same with, the chemical weapons or bioweapons or things like this. It requires expertise, in the real world that an LLM is not going to help you with.
And it requires even the common sense expertise that we've been talking about, which is how to take language-based instructions and materialize them in the physical world. Requires a lot of knowledge that's not in the instructions.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of biologists have posted on this actually in response to those things, saying do you realize how hard it is to actually do the lab work? This is not trivial.
Yeah, and that's Hans Moravec comes to light once again.